Lakon, this was cool, man. I mean, I feel like we always are saying, "Wow, what a great conversation," but it's true. We kind of have pretty good conversations all the time. So, what'd you think
We're
about
pretty
this
good
one?
at this shit, Demetrius.
We
We're pretty good
are.
at this shit. What can I
We're
say?
the
We
most
have great conversations.
underrated.
That's why people listen.
Yeah, in the podcast niche, the AI ML podcast niche, we are the most underrated. We're sleeper. People are sleeping on this podcast right here.
Completely, which is why, if you're listening, you should ask your friends. But today we had on Olalekan Elesin, who is currently the director of data platform at HRS Group. And he joined us today to talk about his experience previously building a machine learning platform at Scout 24. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I'll tell you why, Demetrios, because this was the best demonstration and explanation of the role of product management in ML, technical product management in ML, that we've had on this podcast, right?
Ooh.
A lot of times what we talk about is the totality of what's required to put machine learning into production. And just like the way that Lekan went from an engineer to a data
He's
engineer
done it all.
into a product manager,
Yep.
charted his journey and made that, applied the lessons. I thought it was like an incredible description and discussion. What do
Yeah,
you think?
I mean, he also called out what the main metrics they were looking at were and how they didn't have infinite resources, so they had to focus on two major, like I wouldn't say low-hanging fruit, but like the most impactful things that they could do for the data scientists. And I really appreciate how he broke down how they figured that out, what the most impacting pieces of the platform they could work on were. And I mean, just all around great guy. The dude is. What did he say at one point? I'm paraphrasing here, but it's a quote. It's like be number two or be number one or number two in something or get out. And so that was
Yeah, that's
his.
exactly what he just said. I'm trying to be number one or be number two in your career or get out.
Yeah, that's his attitude. This dude does not mess around. So let's get into it. If you all enjoy these podcasts, please, like Vishnu was saying, tell a friend. Or if you don't enjoy them, but you want them to be better and you think you know how they could be better, hit us up. We always are looking for feedback, and we've got pretty thick skin by now. I don't know if you've seen any of the YouTube comments of me playing guitar for the meetups that we do. They're not nice. So if I can handle that, I could probably handle your feedback. All right. Let's hear it if you want to tell us what you think we should be doing better. And let's get into it. I want to start it out with your experience at Scout 24. I know that there's all kinds of stuff that you can talk about as far as technical leadership and building platform teams, and I hope that we can get into that. But first, maybe you can give us a bit of background on what it was like at Scout 24. What was the situation?
Okay, so it's quite interesting, right? Because anytime I think about it, it helps me to reflect more. I think it was more at the beginning when I joined. I joined Scout 24 as a data landscape engineer, right? And then we had this transformation to set up platforms and platform teams internally. And there was this, and I think back then we had these three pillars. So we came up, the transformation team came up with this application platform, the data platform, which I was part of as a data landscape engineer. And then there was this third pillar, which was the AI platform. It was just there. Nobody was listening, picking it, but it was quite vivid on the pillars. And then I think the CTO back then, I've forgotten his name. His first name is Richard, but I've forgotten his last name. They was really keen on having this AI platform team. So I walked up to my manager back then and said, I'm interested in this. I have a bit of product sense, and I might be able to make this happen. So we started the process of, oh yeah, you need to have product management skills. You need to go for product management workshops and all that, just to build my product knowledge because I was coming from really technical background. I went from software engineer to full stack engineer to front end engineer to data engineer to data science engineer and then to data landscape engineer. But I had this nick for product. So what happened was I think I was on a training for about 6 months or like an apprenticeship under a technical product manager for data platform back then, who is my mentor, by the way, and then evolved into the technical product management of the AI platform. So basically started it with one, I think about engineers that were basically machine learning engineers for a couple on one. I think our central data science team back then. I think for me that was the starting point. And interestingly, I attended reInvent. This was 2019, and one of the things that caught my attention was a technical product manager there, who was for I think the step functions SDK for data science SDK, which later became or evolved into SageMaker pipelines. And I was quite intrigued by how he was able to break down a couple of things, how he was able to even write code. So I then went back and said, yeah, this is it. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to bring ML to live as a platform at Scout 24 back then. And it was about 6 months thereabout, but it was an interesting journey. So initially we didn't know where to start. And this is for definitely all platform teams, right? We didn't know how to start. We had clashes with the data science team because they felt we were trying to take their jobs away. But interesting, it was just us figuring out the what we wanted to build rather than just going, oh yeah, we have a platform and then we have this idea about a platform, let's just go build it. It was basically us trying to in the beginning phases really doing a lot of discovery work, which I think most startups actually do if they want to succeed, right? Which is we know there is a problem, but where is the solution, or how do we solve that problem? Not necessarily going from an idea to the solution space, which is just walking through discovery phases and then eventually to the problem and then scaling the solution. I think that was basically it. In the initial phases was a bit rough. We had retrospective with data scientists, and it was more, oh yeah, you're trying to do this, but this is how people should engage us, and blah blah blah, things like that. Eventually, we figured out how to solve, which is solving for the data scientists first, but
Yeah.
then also from that, then scaling to the other parts of the organization, other engineers. And then what we realized was, at least what we learned, and what I learned was once we were able to solve for data scientists that were willing to work with us, even though it was painful for them in the beginning, it was a really huge change from their existing workflow to a new workflow. I think one metric that stuck with me, that I took away, was when we interviewed one of the data scientists in the beginning, it used to take them about at least 4 weeks to move into production, right? And then we turned it around to maximum of 3 weeks. And then we had one engineer who was really keen about what we built. We went from building the model into production in I think less than 24 hours or so.
I mean, that's the ultimate metric for a platform team, right? Time to production.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
that was a really great overall landscape view of the platform journey that you guys went through at Scout 24. I want to start sort of by backing up and first asking, what is a data landscape engineer or data landscape architect? Like, what was the role that you were in just prior to shifting into product management?
Okay, it was more, let me think about that, because that's an intelligent question, right? I've never thought about what it is, but I know what I was doing.
Sure.
I think what it is was really making sure that was an engineer was responsible or was part of a team responsible for making sure everyone could do analytics easily.
Okay. And
Yeah. Go ahead.
so basically, like, you guys had, I'm assuming, a lot of analysts, dashboarding professionals, maybe even analytics engineers, and you were sort of responsible for the data model and infrastructure that those professionals interfaced with. Is that right?
So we're responsible for one piece of it, which is the data infrastructure. So that was our major responsibility. Even though we had some data models that we're responsible for, which also helped us to know what we're building and how to use what we're building, but it was more of the infrastructure. So we had this notebook environment before SageMaker became popular. We had this notebook environment that we were managing, which was based on Elastic MapReduce, AWS EMR.
Yeah.
But then what we then observed, which was one of the things that was a huge learning for us, or at least for me when building the AI platform, was that data scientists, because it took the infrastructure, which was AMR back then, it took about 10 to 15 minutes to launch, right? Data scientists didn't need a lot of Spark. All they needed was an EC2 instance to come up in less than 5 minutes, and they wanted to do something on Jupyter. Not every of their work had to do with Spark. But for analysts, the data analysts, it was quite different because they were munching huge amounts of data. So the data scientists just were clever enough to then, really clever people, to then hack out some EC2 machine, connect it with their local through SSH tunneling. And for them, it was normal, right? It was, oh yeah, it takes me 10 minutes or 5 minutes or 7 minutes to start this up. So why should I try something new?
Yeah.
And this was one of the first things that we solved, which is we know that you're doing this already. If you go by this approach, which you don't have to think of so many scripts, SSH tunneling and all that, just a CLI tool that says AI platform notebook start, and it starts up a notebook ready in less than 30 minutes, ready in less than, I think, 5 or 3 minutes. And you don't have to think about copying things or back and forth from your computer to a remote server. Would you try that? And usually was a lot of no. I wouldn't try it because I prefer what I was doing, like every other customer, right? But what we then did was to show them how it looked like. So I sat with them in real customer interviews, running through a customer interview and saying, walk me through a daily experience. And then they walk me through, and then I show them this interesting, simple thing to do. And they're like, wow, can I use this right now? I'm like, yeah, sure. Just log into your AWS account and you can use it. And then, can I copy my notebooks from? I said, yeah, you can do that. And then, okay.
Yeah. That's
And then
delight.
the next morning you get, I tried this and it's super interesting. Can I deploy a model right away? I'm like, sure.
Yeah, no,
And that was how we went.
got it. No, I love that. It's so clear how you think as like both a product professional and an engineer from the standpoint that you completely understand. This is actually where I think a lot of sometimes this technical product stuff can break down, where it's like there's a real workflow component that the tools of the trade are one of the most defining aspects of an engineer, a data scientist, like whatever technical professional. Your tools make
Yeah.
you a technician, right?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of product professionals walking in may not necessarily understand the emotional connection to your tools that every technical professional has, right? There's a reason
Yeah.
why like there are certain like old car mechanics that do things the way that they've been doing for like decades, right? You're tied to your tools. And I think it's cool to hear in your depiction of the events how intimately you understood like why the different technical professionals at your company worked the way they did, and then were able to create that customer delight experience on their behalf. The question, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah,
Sorry.
go ahead. I think you're totally right, right? And this was not easy for me because I'm an engineer. I'm an engineer by trade. I studied computer science. Really thinking from the customer perspective was a bit of a challenge, I would say. Also for the engineers that I was working with back then, but it was something that I had to learn. And I give you an example. Even right now, I'm not building an AI platform as currently. I'm building a data platform and then leading some cross-functional data science teams. This particular problem that I highlighted to you, that people that you mentioned, right? People being used to what they're comfortable with. We had a internal customer, like a roadmap discussion, a customer interview session, and one of the data scientists in my current company said, "We've been working with this technology for at least 5 years, and we're used to it. You need to convince us why," and which is for me, it's normal, right? I guess for people new to building internal platform teams, the assumption is, yeah, we're an internal platform teams, you're a colleague, so you must use what we've built. But it doesn't work. Usually it doesn't, most times, it doesn't work that way. You have to walk backwards from that emotional connection and making it a lot better for them. I agree with you completely.
Yeah, we're on the same page there. I love it. I wanted to kind of take a step back here, and you've narrated us through the various actions that you took sort of as a product/technical professionals to really drive a change in mindset amongst the data science team and the delight that you inspired. From Scout 24 standpoint, I'm actually at a
Yeah.
fast growing startup. I think many of our guests have been, making a platform investment is a complex endeavor, right? You're investing in a long range project when your business needs in the short term are changing very quickly, right? And, I'm not necessarily as familiar with Scout 24's maturity and the size and the revenue size of the business, but can you give us a sense of like why the company felt like it was the right time to take the leap and invest in a platform approach, and what made them want to make that investment in you and your team?
That's a really deep one. So I remember back then I was taken into a discussion. So I think it was quite clear that it was taking us time to move from idea to for ML ideas into production. Not because the data scientists were not good. To be honest, I think they're really good. I would, if I could, I would have hired all of them to join me at my current company right now. They were really, really good. But it was just the tools of the trade, right? And it wasn't that the data landscape team or the data platform team, which I was back then, which I was part of back then, wasn't really didn't really care about what they were doing. It was just that there were so many things at some point, and this is to product understanding, right? Which is at every stage in product, you need to start looking at the long tail effect and start looking for how can you cater for that long tail. And most times it's that's where that long tail is what gave birth to now we need to cater for this long tail and then give birth to something that helps us to speed our time to market for with AI products.
So just so I understand that long tail piece there, basically what you're saying is you need to understand, I guess you could say, almost the exceptions, right? The places in
Mm-hmm.
on the bell curve where like there is an
Yeah.
exceptional need or an exceptional sort of opportunity that is
Yeah.
perhaps numerically small, but speaks to, you know, I don't know, the most intense need. Is that what I'm trying to understand there?
Yes, definitely. And I give you an example, right? So before YouTube started, content creation was more from let's say, the big companies in Hollywood. And then what YouTube did was to cater for that long tail. And let's say there are people that want to create content on their own, that they are self create, they are creators and they want to create content. And then YouTube started catering for that long tail of people that could create content on their own. And this is for me because even building a technical platform, what I did was to research how people build platforms in general. And that was my starting point of building a platform, any kind of platform. Even what I do right now is researching how people build platforms. And if you take that and take what YouTube was doing and then take Twitch, on top of that, Twitch looked at a really long tail of gamers who were also creators, right? And then built a platform around that. And for me is looking at it from that perspective, which is the long tail of analytics at that point in time, and how that long tail was significant to the competitive advantage Scout 24 wanted to have, which is differentiating with data science and machine learning, and how we could leverage that and speed that up as quickly as possible,
And
and then building on top of that long tail.
what were some of the long tail things that you had to keep in mind? Like, what were some specific pieces?
I mentioned one already, which was the notebook experience. I think for every data scientist, is the first thing is nail that notebook experience. We at that point, the data platform team we had an internal environment where it was notebook built on top of EMR, and it was taking a bit of time to launch. It was maybe 10 to 15 minutes. Not that it was bad, but it was a lot of things baked into it that was general for everybody that wanted to do an analytics. And data scientists were really clever to hack out something and say, yeah, let's launch something on EC2. So the first part was to really simplify that notebook experience. Once we did that, the next thing was how can we deploy models into production, which the data platform team at that point in time was not really catering for. Even though the data scientists, interestingly, they heard about SageMaker, and the things they heard about SageMaker back then was it was really expensive, it's complex to use, and all that, and quite a number of things. What we then, and it was difficult to put things together, build a pipeline together that was doing, let's say, a model training pipeline, or let's say batch inference pipeline. It was really complex, and we didn't know how to do it. So what we did was the notebook experience, and then and I will go into the more technical, into the nitty gritty of it shortly. Into the notebook experience, and then the model deployment experience, and then the model inference experience. And how we got to this was I'm not sure I'm allowed to mention this. There was a book I read. It's called can I mention it?
Yeah, please do.
It's called Outcome Driven Innovation, right? I've forgotten the writer of the book, but it's a really good book about how to identify needs. And we did a couple of statistics to figure out what was the most pressing problem for people that wanted to go from idea to production for machine learning. When we spoke to people at random, what we had was, yeah, we need to improve data quality. And this is what people complain about in machine learning. They said, oh, yeah, data quality is bad. I spoke to my fellow engineers back then. They were like, yeah, you need to improve the data quality. You need to improve the data quality. So what we did was we had a survey, and this is now the tactics of building a platform from scratch. ML platform, data platform, application platform, whatever platform. So what we did was to identify, let's say, topical ideas that people were telling us. We were just talking to about 10 people within the company, which were our colleagues. But if someone is building a startup let's say from a platform idea, it needs to talk to at least 30 people. That's my view. But internally, we spoke to about 10 people, and then they came up with, oh, you need to improve data quality. You need to simplify the time it takes to find new data assets. You need to simplify the time it takes to build up a model. You need to simplify the time it takes to do X, Y, Z. So we created a survey from that and then ran that survey by 40 people. And what we did was, from that survey, we identified 3 things that were most important. It was, number 1, simplify the time it takes to get an environment up. Number 2, simplify the time it takes to put a machine learning model in production. I think I've forgotten the third. And then the third one was increasing the knowledge about building machine learning models. None of those 3. And I think the 5th one, which was the least on the what people voted, was data quality.
Fascinating.
And what we did was because we knew that the team was quite small back then. I think one engineer in Berlin with me and another engineer in Munich, and then we had half the time of one engineer in Berlin. We had to focus on 2 things, and it was really easy for us to identify priorities because we ran surveys across both locations, and people gave us feedback. We collected that, and we saw, number 1 is to simplify the amount of time it takes to get machine learning model into production and the infrastructure, and then increasing knowledge about machine learning. And that was all that we focused on in that 6 months. And what that did was the metric I gave, which is at least 4 weeks to at most 3 weeks. And then we saw an exception where an engineer went from idea to production, I think, in 24 hours or 3 days or so.
And the metrics, what were the other metrics that you were looking at? Because there is that one, but I imagine spinning up a notebook is also another metric you were looking at. And how did that change?
Yeah, that, like I said, it was 10 minutes for the generic analytics environment built on EMR. And then what the data scientists were doing was about 5 to 7 minutes. I think that we reduced it to 3 minutes, if not less.
Nice.
And then what that gave us an opportunity. We then started with, and these are the tactics for building products, right? We first started with a mock-up with PowerPoint just for the data scientists to get a feel of what we're talking about. And then we built a CLI script, and then we converted our CLI script into a Python command line application where they just said AI platform notebook start. And then if they wanted to shut it down, they said AI platform notebook shut down. And then we realized that we also interviewed them, and then they said they don't want to think about shutting it down. We said, okay, fine, we add automatic shutdown at the end of the day, or when your notebook is idle after 1 hour. We added that, and they just started notebook in the morning, did what they had to do, went to lunch. If they were at lunch, during lunchtime, if the notebook was idle for about 1 hour, it shut down to save cost.
Nice.
And then they came back, they started it, and they went home. At the end of the day, the notebook was shut down. And then the notebooks were automatically saved. And then they resumed their work at where they stopped. On top of the second part, which was increasing the knowledge about machine learning, right? Is SageMaker. We were using SageMaker Notebook instances back then, and SageMaker Notebook has this part where most people don't really know about, is that it has this piece. I think there's this hidden piece where they kind of store notebooks. They take the notebooks from GitHub and then they make it available as examples. We saw how we had to go into the code and see how that was done. So we then built internal examples at Scout and made it available through that. So when people were looking at the SageMaker examples, they could also look at the company examples as well, which helped them to speed up the time to machine learning also.
Oh, that's so cool. There's one thing that I wanted to just ask before Vishnu jumps into it is, you mentioned you were going to get into the nitty-gritty about how you did this.
Yeah.
Can you explain that too, real quick?
Okay, yeah. So from the product side, which is those interviews, right? And then into the nitty-gritty is interviewing the data scientists, showing them, let's say and this is more the product work that most people don't do, but it's the real success. It's the defining factor for your success as building an ML platform or any other platform, is having interviews with your users internally and then testing ideas out really, really rapidly. Because I was technical, right, I could prototype ideas as really quickly as possible. And then I had one engineer with me went during the interviews, which made them see, at least get a feel of what data scientist was talking about. Also help the engineers to develop empathy and really thinking about how we design this so that it's really easy for the data scientists, and really getting into testing a lot of things out, trying to tweak SageMaker notebook, seeing if this will work. And then this was the precursor for me becoming, I think, a machine learning hero for AWS, which is I started creating machine learning content internally for our data scientists. We even built SageMaker containers to really speed up things that people were doing. And this was most of those content I wrote internally was then what I could publish, the ones I could publish. I then published them to help the broader community of around, at least the public community around machine learning for AWS.
Where I wanted to jump in, and I really do want to dive into you being a machine learning hero for AWS, maybe later on in the conversation. But what got me going was really that metric that you had around educating people, and you know how that was a part of your definition of success. Because what I think our many conversations over the course of this podcast around machine learning platforms has taught me is that, number one, process excellence is just as much of engineering as technical excellence, right? Your proficiency with your tools and your proficiency with process. And the reason platforms exist is to encode and scale process efficiency, right? Within tools and systems. And so I think hearing you describe the way that your metrics map to that, you know, I think it's actually like a great set of metrics for any platform team to adopt. And you know, it's kind of just a thought that I'm having as I'm building out the internal data platform at my company, you know, which is like time to value is the highest, you know, endorsement of a team's effort.
Yeah, definitely. I think for me, it's when I talk to people that are building internal platforms, usually because most times, right, when people build, and I think I can also mention this person, right? So before I started in that role, I had to send an email. I reached out to Marty Kagan, who's like the go-to
No
guy
way.
for. Yeah, I did.
Silicon Valley
And
Product
then he
Group or
sent,
whatever, right?
yeah, Silicon Valley Pro. And then he responded to me and then
No way.
explained in detail. And he also sent me a blog post to go through, right? I think most times when I talk to people who want to build internal platform teams, ML, application, whatever, data, whatever they want to build, they miss out on the essential understanding of you need to get the product side right first before before building the platform, because you need really experienced people that can understand that these are my colleagues, but then I'm building something for them. Or this is, if I'm building as a startup, it's the product side that's most important. What you see, 80 to 70% of the time when people are building internal platforms or ML platforms, is that they put really good individual contributors together.
Yeah.
And then those individual contributors assume that they know what the people that they're building for need, which is individual contributors being ML engineers that are maybe staff or lead. But then they miss out on the one thing you mentioned before, which was the emotion between the person that's doing the work and the tool the person is using.
Yeah.
For us, it was more important to crack that first. Once we knew where that emotion lied, where that emotion was, we fit so many things in there, and then it was voila. I remember we had one engagement with one of our data science teams. We were building a complex problem back then. And this was one of the things I really wish I'd done at Scout, which was we built a SageMaker container for Snorkel, which is this data labeling, automatic labeling library.
Right.
And it changed the trajectory from, I think, training time when they were building on SageMaker versus what they were doing before, from about 6 hours to 30 minutes, which was really, really cool.
Wow.
even this came as a, not like we planned it, but it was just something that, oh yeah, this is something that they're doing. Let's enable them to do this better. But what pained me, what I really feel is that I could not open source it because I'd forgotten about it totally. It was when I left Scout. I remember, but oh yeah, we built this back then. But I never had time to build another version of it.
You know, I actually really want to jump into talking a little bit about AWS and some of your work outside of work. I think
Yeah,
one of the
yeah.
things I'm enjoying most about this conversation is hearing like how intentionally and thoughtfully you have been upskilling, whether it's like at work or in, outside of work. You know, you really invested in mastering, fundamentals of the product discipline. You have had tons of experience as an engineer, and in addition, you also hold this title of machine learning hero from AWS. I want to start by asking you, how do you think about your career growth and spending time intentionally to grow your career?
That's a very tricky question. A very intelligent one. Um, so let me think about how best to answer this because really don't know. I think for me, so when I look back, anytime I get asked that question, is when I started my career in Nigeria, was before moving to Germany. I made up my mind. I think it was in 2014 that I wanted to, by 2020, I wanted to be the number one big data professional in Africa as a whole. And I put this on my on my Stack Overflow profile. And this was in 2014. I checked it in 2020. I was like shocked, like, oh yeah, I think I tried. And this ties back to what I learned quite early, which is be number one or number two in your field or get out. And this for me is the driving factor. But then, right, it's more from a conscious decision to always bring value in any way that I can. And this is for right now. I'm spending a lot of time learning management. Spend a lot of time at the same time in the morning. I wake up. I read new Python libraries. About 2 weeks ago, up until now, I find myself reading this conference, this AI academia conference, Rexis. I'm
Oh
not sure
yeah,
most people read it.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I was going through their videos. I was going through some of their write-ups, and I think, to be honest, I think any machine learning practitioner, right, either engineer or a leader, should be spending time there. There's this other one, NLP conference. Also, I've forgotten the name.
NLP Conf, yeah, I
I
think so.
also,
Yeah.
I'm also reading through some of their papers and Amazon Science. I spent some time recently also going through their papers just to see what direction people are going, what direction the industry is going, the collaboration between academia and industry. And for me, this is how I build my career. And then I look at what universities are doing. So outside work, I took a course last year from INSEAD about fintech. The year before then, I took a course from Wharton about AI for business. And this is just for me really I want to be an all-round person with regards to my career, basically. That's just,
You
I don't know
know,
how to put that in a very concise way.
no, I think that was. It's awesome to hear what you do, right? More than I think a summary or a vision statement. Sometimes I think for the practitioners that listen to our podcast, hearing like the tactical steps of what you do is extremely helpful. And I totally think that was helpful. What stands out to me is a total thirst for learning, right? A desire for mastery of a lot of different aspects of machine learning, which sometimes is neglected, right? There's a lot that goes into making machine learning successful, and we talk about that on this podcast, and you're clearly interested in learning all those different aspects. And I gotta say, if you ever want to go for a job interview, like, don't even bother with interviewing, just send them this clip from your from this podcast,
Def-
because they'll just realize
Definitely.
this guy's trying to win.
Yeah, this guy's
Demetrios, I think
legit.
you have something there, right?
Yeah, I really like that you said this, which speaks deeply to me because I also feel the same way. It's like anything that I do, I want to bring immense value to that. And so that's super cool to hear. I mean, following up though and diving deeper into AWS and what you're doing in that ecosystem, why did you feel like you wanted to invest so deeply into AWS specifically? Is it because you had the experience at Scout 24 and you figured, well, I kind of already know this, let me help others know this?
Oh, okay. There are two sides to it, but that's a very intelligent question too, right? So when I joined Scout, that was my first time being into AWS. And what really fascinated me about AWS back then was cloud formation, and which is a service that most people don't talk about. But
It's crazy.
it's crazy to be
Once you
honest. I
get it,
remember
it's yeah.
mind blowing. I remember speaking with one of the senior engineers, and I asked him, "So why would I write some YAML template and then it spins off infrastructure?" And I spent weeks really trying to understand how that worked. And immediately I got it. It was just a light bulb in my head. So I can do this and describe infrastructure. And this was in 2017. I can describe infrastructure as a YAML, and then it does this. So what else is possible on this cloud on the cloud? And that was how I began exploring and exploring. In fact, I invested some of my own money to even learn this because I was really fascinated at what could happen. And then to the point of how did I start sharing knowledge? I wrote a lot of internal blog posts back then at Scout for data scientists, and I visited Stack Overflow one day and said, let me even see what people are asking about on SageMaker. And then I realized some of the things that I wrote about were actually could be useful for people outside. So I walked up to my manager and said, is it possible for me to share some of this content? And he said, yeah. You just remove a couple of things that are, let's say, internal, and then feel free to share it. So what I did was to change a couple of things in there and then made it available for people. And the feedback I'd been getting was, oh, yeah, this is really good. And also, when I think about my own problems that I want to solve, I remember when I started CD for AutoML, it was basically me reading I think it was a publication by McKinsey or Gardner, I cannot remember. I think it was McKinsey that says by 2025, 40% of ML models in production will be using AutoML. And I was like, okay, if by 2025, it's going to be 40%, why not let's bring 2025 to 2020? And that was where I started CD for AutoML. And I'm a great fan of AutoML, to be honest. I'm not the best data scientist, which I was still telling some of my team members today, some of my teams, and I'm not the best data scientist, but what I will tell you is that how to think about solving the problem with data science. I will not tell you the best model to choose, but I will tell you how to figure out the real problem that you're trying to solve. And for me, it was bringing 2025 into 2020 and that making that really making that available. So that was how I started it. And that's how I go about most of the things I'm trying to do with what I do with AWS. What are people talking about the future? Can we bring it into now?
I love that problem solving approach that you take, right? Which is to say, like, hey, here's an ideal end state. Can we get there faster? Right? Can we get there better? Can we get there faster? Like, how can I make that happen, both personally and professionally as part of a team? One of the things that I want to ask you about before we jump into the AutoML piece, which I think I would really love to dive into, you know, you know, it's an obvious statement, but we're in 2022 now, right? And it's like AWS has really expanded its product portfolio. I think it's got like so many different products now. In any situation where there's a sort of popular open source project, AWS is basically forking it and bringing it into its platform, right? And it's smart. It makes sense. Because at the end of the day, AWS solves a lot of problems for places where compliance, billing, and efficiency are the main problems, right? Not necessarily technical innovation. But there's, in the machine learning world particularly, there is a heavy emphasis on best of breed tools, right? So around monitoring, you'll have a point solution tool that says we're the best at monitoring. At compute optimization, we'll say we're the best at compute optimization. Training, we're the best at training, right? How do you think about the difference between the integrated ecosystem that AWS offers versus the sort of best of breed model that the machine learning world has sort of started to move towards? Like, how do you compare and contrast and think about strengths and differences?
Okay, so this is my personal view first, and then I tell you what I think from the industry standpoint. So my personal view is that some of this, let's say, focus tools, sometimes I think personally, and this might be wrong, right? I think they're overrated. And my view is that if you talk to most companies are even still struggling to put a linear regression model in production. And this is the market. I mean, I'm in Germany, I'm in Europe, and I can speak for that. I'm not so sure about the US market, but most companies still struggle with putting linear regression in production and seeing how that what that looks like. And then on the other side, we have lots of companies saying, "Oh, we can help you monitor XYZ. We put layer this on top of it, and all that and all that." That's my personal view. Now, from an industry perspective, right now, is if I'm making a decision between build or buy, or leverage AWS or use something that exists. First question I ask myself, which what I do every day for myself personally, is this the best use of our time? If we build this on our own, does this make us does this differentiate us in a competitive way? If it doesn't, why waste time building it? And then we then go into, does AWS solve it, or do we go into something that's really, this is what they do actually? My first disposition is to always evaluate if AWS solves it, and then do a comparison if someone else does it better. And if someone else does it better, definitely why not? I think when I started the data AI platform at Scout back then, we evaluated ML flow. And ML Flow was, I think, when I attended Spark Summit in 2018, that was when ML Flow got introduced, and all that hype around it and all that conversation around it. And then one of the engineers said, "Oh, let's evaluate ML Flow." And for me, it was okay, fine. To get engineers motivated from a product manager standpoint, you also need to give them that guided autonomy, right? So I said, "Yeah, let's evaluate this, try this out, and see." And then another set of engineers, I think one other engineer tried out SageMaker, and we just compared and realized that it will take us a lot of time to really get this integrated into the tooling that we have in existence back then. So if we use SageMaker, we move faster, even though it might not have as much fanciness or as much capability as MLflow at that point in time, but integrated better into our ecosystem. And this is what I look out for, is the integration into the existing ecosystem, which lots of people shy away from. They say, "Oh yeah, it's legacy, we don't want to think about it." But that legacy is what paid the bills and still might be paying the bills to a reasonable extent. So we really need to think about how this integrates into legacy, quote unquote, right? And then evolve from there. And I've spoken to some companies where they say, "Oh yeah, we have all our data in AWS, but we prefer to use Google Cloud or Google Vertex, because Google Vertex is the next big thing. There's a lot of hype around it." And what they don't think about is that in machine learning, because when you're building machine learning, when you're designing machine learning algorithms, the reason why machine learning algorithms are not so suitable accessing relational systems is because they consistently access relational systems at millisecond latency. And when I see teams saying, "Oh yeah, we will move our machine learning infrastructure to Google Cloud, but then all our applications are in AWS and S3, I'm like, have you really thought about the cross-cloud data transfer costs and what that means for your applications, or what that means for what you want to design? Most times they don't think about it, just, "Oh yeah, we need to go to Google Cloud." But you need to really think about it from a strategic point of view, which is, we want to go multi-cloud as a company, right? What does this mean for us from an application design perspective? What does this mean for us from machine learning and other aspects of data, AI, and other things that people put into consideration? And this is how I think about it, is that integration into the existing ecosystem.
So you said something there that I think you kind of just skipped over, but I caught it, and it was to get buy-in from the different stakeholders for when you were planning out how to, or which platform to use. You were thinking, well, should we use MLflow? Should we use SageMaker? And someone wanted to test out MLflow. You said, yeah, go test it out. Go have your fun with it, because ultimately we're going to see. But it was a little bit like, that's a nice little Jedi mind trick to get people stoked about whatever the choice is at the end of the day, because they felt like they were part of it. So
yeah, definitely.
So I like that. That's a nice one for me to remember too. Now let's dive into this continuous development for AutoML because I want to know what it is first of all.
Okay. Where did it start? So what it is was basically how it started. I think it started from that McKinsey article I came about. And then I just sat back and just thought to myself, how many AutoML use cases are in production? Most times you see, and no offense to data scientists, right? Is that they feel that, oh, AutoML is going to take our jobs away. To be honest, it's not taking your jobs away. It's only making you more efficient. And I'm not sure if I still have that. I don't have it anymore. I think it's on my slide share. There's a particular diagram where I drew to my internal stakeholders back then, or stakeholders at Scout, where I said, if you're building an AI platform, the AI platform is catering for two markets, which two internal markets or two internal personas, which is the data scientists, which you want to enable them to build the real business differentiator with analytics or advanced analytics. And you want to look at another long tail, which is this engineers that are really ML enthusiasts that are really interested in ML and what it can do and really speed up their own time to market. And that's what I think, where I see that AutoML comes in, which is that those ML enthusiasts are not, they don't really they didn't really do a lot of statistics in school. They're not super crazy data scientists. They're just engineers like me that want to leverage machine learning to do stuff. And then around that is most times, like every other machine learning initiative, right? The model works on my computer. So how can we take AutoML and put it in production relatively easily? So there's the fact that you can specify the data sets, and there is the fact that you can specify the features that you want to use. You don't need to think about feature engineering, which I think this is where data scientists really excel when combined with domain knowledge. I just know that I know domain knowledge because I know my application, but I know what I want to predict. I don't know about the techniques in feature engineering, pandas, numpy, whatever I need to use in between. Can I do something? And that's where I started from. Okay, I tried a couple of libraries and I realized I think SageMaker Autopilot was really interesting. So that's the first part. I said, oh yeah, let me try this one out. And then I saw, oh wow, the accuracy is really good. Okay, it might solve a problem. Okay, so as an engineer, back to CloudFormation experience, how can I spin off infrastructure that would do this relatively easily? And this was basically how it started. And I remember I just had my son back then, and he was always crying. Sometimes I even had to carry him while still building out this framework. At the same, but that was how it started. Was simply I wanted to simplify my own experience for putting AutoML into production.
That's so cool. So we've got a few last rapid fire questions for you. The
Yeah.
first one that I want to ask is, what was the last book you read?
The last book I read is Empowered by Marty Kagan. I read multiple books at the same time. The last one is Empowered by Marty Kagan, and there's this, I've forgotten his name, I think he's a Stanford professor. He talks about power dynamics in the workplace. I think it's
Nice.
his name, Jeffrey Pfeffer.
Ah,
There we go.
yes. Okay. Cool.
Yeah, yeah.
Next,
So those two books are the last two books I read. Yeah.
next question that I had for you was, what was the last bug that you smashed?
There was one recently. So most times right now I don't write a lot of code because I lead teams that write code. I think the last book that I smashed was about DBT. So we're introducing DBT, the data platform, and then we had
Nice.
some issues with it. But it was more working with the engineers to solve it rather than me solving it. But yeah, I think it was related to DBT and DBT or glue. Yeah, DBT.
Nice. All right. What's one piece of technology you're bullish on that would surprise people? So not the AutoML, because I don't think that would surprise anyone. What's something that would surprise people?
This is this one is really interesting. This is really good. This is really good. I think, right? I think that if AWS And I've been very critical of them internally, and even I would say it here, right? If they are really serious about AWS Glue, I think it can be a technology that will surprise everyone. I give you an example. So when they built AWS Glue, it was just, oh yeah, this it could do a couple of things, and then they built ETL on top of it, and then they built interactive sessions, which was quite similar to Databricks cluster. So I did a test, right? I started a Databricks cluster, which was the community edition, and it took about 3 to 4 minutes to start a cluster. I started something quite similar on Glue with Glue interactive sessions, and it took about 2 minutes to run to get started. And I think if they are really serious about it, right, which I've told them quite a number of times, it will change the game. And most people don't know, because right now we built something with DBT plus Glue, and the experience was someone was telling me in the AWS Euro community that if AWS Glue internally was really serious about what they're doing and community engagement, most people would not need to use things like Snowflake.
Oh.
I actually think that is such an interesting choice. I gotta say, Demetrius, that's the best answer to the question that we've gotten so far, because people usually pick something like flying cars or stuff like that, but that is actually a really interesting hot take in our industry, because I have used AWS Glue. I have been frustrated by AWS Glue, but I totally see the potential now that you mention it.
Yeah, yeah.
Last one for you I got is, how do you want to be remembered?
That's a really good. I want to be very rich. I want to be known as very rich. That's one. And then to have solved a lot of problems, like the environmental problems, right? Sometimes I'm really politically inclined, for my country. I'm from Nigeria, and I want to see it change. And I want to be remembered for, even though I'm a technical person, but then really be remembered for some really huge environmental impact. And this was, for me, people talk about this green stuff. Oh yeah, we need to go green. But then I picked up the book by Bill Gates on climate. I think about last year. And it really struck me how simple solutions can have lasting impact on the world. And that's how I want to be remembered. Simple solutions that can have lasting impact on the world. And then at some point visit Mars or so.
There you go. Shoot for the stars, man. I love
Or,
it.
or just go through the infrared rays from the James Webb satellites and go 13 billion years back in time. If my
those are
mind
so
can be
cool.
transferred back in time.
Yeah, those are so cool, man. I love that. Well, this has been really special, and I appreciate you coming on here. I appreciate you being very candid with us. I learned a ton. Thank you.
Thank you. Also, thank you a lot. Thanks a lot. You asked me quite a number of questions that most people I've not had people ask me in a while. I've not even heard them, and also made me think a lot.
Nice.
I'm very happy to hear that, Lekan. I have to say this was one of the conversations I've most enjoyed. So thank you for joining us.